I think it's a much anticipated first opportunity to discuss the feedback that we've received on both tangible natural resources and climate related disclosures. And I think just to take a moment to celebrate the record levels of responses that we've received on both of those. And I think that's, not only due to the subject matter, but I think there's a lot of outreach that we collectively as a team have been engaged in during that period. And so I think it's great to see those. Of course, having a record level of responses then means that there's a record amount of analysis then to do in response to that. And I think real kudos to the staff team, to Edwin and to Karen and Alex, for having done, really done a lot of work in a very short period of time in order to develop the content for today's meeting. The content of today's meeting is very much in line with what we trailed in the March meeting. And in particular, I think, really what we're concentrating on is the first step in our due process, which is actually to unpack the significant issues that our respondents have raised. And conventionally we'll amalgamate that with the next step, which is actually then for the staff to get into analysing what's actually been said in detail against those the more significant issues that have been raised. But what we wanted to do this time around was actually make a conscious split between those two stages, so that today is very much about making sure that actually what the staff have done is actually put the significant issues that have been raised by respondents out on the table. So we're not going to get into any discussion of the merits of what's been said and how we should move forward. That's going to come in June and in subsequent meetings. What we're looking to do today is make sure that we've got the significant issues out on the table. And so the way that staff have presented the papers is literally SMC by SMC. What are the significant matters that we've heard? And then to propose a way forward in terms of, okay, now how are we going to start to organise those discussions on the more significant matters? And that's very much what each of the papers does at the end of the session. So we have got a lot to get through, and I'll try and keep us moving through the SMCs. Please, keep the interventions short in terms of, I think we've missed this. What about this? This isn't there. As I say, debates, we will have plenty of time for that in June and subsequent meetings. But we need to keep moving today. And the important thing as well is that we're clear with staff, in terms of the papers they need to prepare to get us moving through the more detailed analysis for the June meeting. And that is the start of the process. So they've tried to indicate which ones we think will need to come first in June, which will come to later meetings. So I think without further ado, unless there are any questions on that process, I'm going to hand over to Edwin. So just to check everybody's consent with what we're trying to do today. Okay, so Edwin, over to you. To introduce tangible natural resources.
Let me share my screen. So, the IPSASB issued tangible natural resources are 1892 back in October of last year, and the comment period closed at the end of February. In total, we've received 49 letters. And what I've done is coded the letters in NVivo, and we also took into account the feedback we have received from roundtables and other outreach events. So the way we've coded the responses is as set out on the slide. So in the 4 categories, we have agree, which is the respondent clearly indicated that they agree with the principles that we've proposed. This category could also include minor editorial changes that they've suggested. The second category is partially agree. And in this category, the respondent agreed with the principle, but they have proposed changes to other guidance, so such as application guidance or the non-authoritative guidance to help with the application or the implementation of our proposals. The third category is disagree, and this is where the respondent noted that they do not agree with the matters of principle that we've proposed. And it could also include where the respondent have substantive changes that in effect will change what we've proposed on a principled level. And the last category is no comment. And this one is where the respondent, some of them could have just not mentioned anything about the SMC in the comment letter, or sometimes they would actually explicitly say they have no view because of certain reasons. So, as Ian said, the way we've approached this analysis is in line with due process. And what we plan to do for this check-in meeting is really just to open up the floor to discussions and getting comments from members. And then at the end, after the discussion, we'll go back to me to go through the cross-cutting themes and key issues that we have identified as staff. And we're also going to present a proposed timeline for when we're going to address these key themes and issues. So I'll stop there and pass it back to Ian.
Okay, thank you, Edwin. And I think in particular, staff have responded to members' concerns about just relying on numerical responses because you've got the qualitative response, issues raised, as well as the numerical analysis, so that we've got both qualitative and quantitative analysis literally on the same page. So without further ado, I'll open up for comments on SMC1 on scope. Yep, Angela.
Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Edwin. Excellent job, and I really appreciate all the work that would have gone in to pull this together. Just 2 points on scope. One, I think there is a minority view that isn't captured. It is a minority view, but that's the view that that a separate standard is not required, and it would be better handled as a subset of, say, PP and E. And in that was a sense that there is a broader accountability. There were some comments from a minority around that sort of broader stewardship, guardianship, disclosures, regardless of whether things were recognised on balance sheets. So I just think that was a minority view which is not reflected in view 1 or 2. So just from a completeness point of view, I thought that would be important to acknowledge. My second point is a request to check the facts of view 2, where there's a view that there's been a call for a first principle change to the conceptual framework. And I picked that up when you mentioned in this paper on scope that the 2 audit officers, OAG of Ontario and OAG Canada, called specifically that this accounting standard couldn't be developed without first amending the conceptual framework. I had a look at both of those responses, and in my view, neither called for a first amending the conceptual framework. In fact, OAG Ontario disagreed with putting natural resources on balance sheet and had a number of practical logistical concerns, and actually talked about they would prefer a standard focused on accountability in terms of sustainability and governance and protection. OAG Canada, actually, I think we're quite supportive of the conceptual framework and even of the principle and the standards, but felt the guidance overly restricted or had a tone of non-recognition. So it was just that you had quoted those two as specifically leading the call for a firstly amending the conceptual framework before we go anywhere, but I didn't see that in there at all. And so I wondered if you could just fact check which respondents were actually calling for a firstly amending the conceptual framework. I think it's just those 2 points in terms of reflecting what respondents said in the scope paper. Thanks.
Thanks, Angela. So one additional issue there and a request for staff to have a more detailed look at those two responses in terms of how they're characterised in bringing that issue back. Claudia and then Fabienne.
Thank you. And thank you, Edwin, for the excellent work which you have done in 6 weeks or something like that, from receiving all the responses, analyzing them. Fantastic. I have a remark I've already talked to you. It belongs to SMC1 and probably SMC2. We should clarify if health for future generation is a part of health for conservation, or is it health for conservation is a part of the health for future generation? Is there two separate things? I think we need some clearance on this topic, and maybe we should add it on our work, which we plan to do.
Okay, thanks, Claudia. So instruction staff then to have a look at that and see how it plays into the various different issues, so that we cover that. Fabienne?
Thank you, Jan. And thank you, Edwin. I just wanted to come back to a point I raised with Edwin, that in some jurisdictions, the electromagnetic spectrum is considered matter and hence would be classified as a tangible natural resource. And this idea was made with was that actually it would provide a good example of other items than items held for conservation to fall into the scope of the project. And it would be also an opportunity to disclose information on such resources other than through transactions on commercialized rights to access bandwidths of the spectrum. But from my discussion with Edwin, I understand that it's not the way it would be classified under IPSASB. So I guess maybe some explanations would be useful to help those constituents to understand the difference in the way physical substance is understood. Thank you.
Okay, so that needs to be explicitly referenced, and then we'll decide how to deal with that. Andrew.
Thanks, Ian. It was just an interesting point looking at in paragraph 13, we've classified the types of respondents. And to note that in the other box is really where we would get to users, or the closest thing, I think, in terms of comment letters that we've got from users of the financial statements, and that these individuals all disagreed with the proposals. So just something I wanted to highlight, that I think when we do get to the proposals and start looking at this in more depth, just to bear in mind that when we're looking at users, they've kind of fundamentally all disagreed with the proposals that we've got. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. I think, though, we need to have a look at who are classified as users and the degree to which there may be a correlation with those who are asking for a revisit of the conceptual framework. Because I think we need to have a look at some of those things, because if essentially you've got the same people who are wanting a broader scope, and then, so I think in taking it forward, staff need to understand that. and then make recommendations accordingly. Ross?
I'd like to clarify, because I don't think, based on what I'm seeing, I would necessarily put everyone in that other box as users. So if the board wants us to look into that and do some research on how we'd categorize the others so they can better understand, I think that's fair. But I'd say that's a pretty big generalization, because a quick look, there's professional services firms, there's preparers. But I think we need to be clear that we don't put preparers in the users category. They're a user of the standard. They're not a user of the information from the reports. So if we're going to go down that route, I think we need to be very careful and very crisp in our analysis on that.
Yeah, and it's probably more particularly in that crispness, it's actually what is it that they're not supporting and why, rather than just necessarily they disagree. So it comes back to the quality of what they're telling us, you know, and if, and I'm taking an example, it goes back to, well, actually, we want you to put more stuff on balance sheet and therefore you need to reopen the conceptual framework. That's one perspective. If they want something else. So I think, you know, in doing that, we just need to be get a bit more understanding of what it is that they're not supporting and why. Okay, so I'm now going to move us on to SMC2, which is on definitions. So any significant matters there not covered in the papers? Okay, so let's move on then to SMC3 on depreciation. Anything there not covered? Okay, so then we move on to SMC4 in terms of exemption from certain disclosures. Okay, then we move on to SMC5, cross references to IPSAS 45. Anything there that's not been picked up? Yeah, Andrew.
Thanks, Ken. It was just perhaps something that wasn't clear to me in the papers. In paragraph 4, we mentioned that it was noted that where there was a cross-reference to the principles in IPSAS 45, it may cause confusion when applying the measurement guidance. But we've classified these as partially agree. I'm not sure that I would have put them in the partially agree if they do think that there is going to be confusion when applying the IPSAS 45 principles just with the cross-reference. Because I think that's why we asked this SMC, was to say, is it sufficiently clear just by cross-referencing and not actually, you know, applying the guidance in here? So staff can just perhaps look at that in a little bit more depth just to make sure it is appropriately classified as partially agree.
Ross, back on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I would say, just to be clear, whether it's partially agree or disagree, I think we'll look at the argument first. So I think regardless of whether it's agree or partially agree, the board's going to have to revisit whether the reference using a cross-reference is sufficient or if the guidance needs to be brought into the standard. So we can have a look at that, and just, I don't think that'll impact what we do with it. I think we'll have to have a discussion on that point, regardless of whether it's partially agree or disagree. And just wanted to make that point as well, just so members are clear that we address all of the comments. And that's why we've put the analysis with the arguments first and the quantitative numbers at the back of the paper. So it's a reference point to help us in deciding what to do, but we're looking at the arguments that we've put forward, and this is our normal process, although we never usually do this step where we bring you everything before the filter starts. You know, we will surely do that. Thanks.
Thanks, Ross. Okay, anything else on that? So then we move on to SMC6, which is on transitional provisions. Okay. So then let's move on to SMC 7, which is the amendments to heritage and the interaction there. Okay, and then SMC8 are on proposed implementation guidance and illustrative examples, any significant additional issues members want to raise. Okay, so thanks very much everyone for the review, and I think thank you to Edwin as well for the analysis you've done in terms of picking up the significant issues. So if you'd like to talk about the next paper on proposed next steps. Oh, Yakuba, sorry, I missed you.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to reflect on something that I saw in the papers. It seemed to me that the responses are so different when you look at feedback from Roundtable compared to those coming from comment. Is there any insight from there coming from the staff? Did you notice that? And is there any reflection you have on it? Thank you.
Thank you, Yakuba. Good point. Ross?
Yeah, I'll go first on this, but I encourage any other staff that have participated in roundtables and on the projects to come in with thoughts as well. But actually, I would say the feedback from roundtables was rather consistent with what we got in the response letters. So there were no big surprises between what we were hearing in the roundtables and what came through. The difference you get is at the roundtables, you're kind of asking a yes, no, do you agree with an SMC, and then taking one-off written comments with what they don't agree with. With the comment letters, you get a much more rich and depth of response on whether they agree or disagree. And that's why we're able to categorize partially agrees, disagrees, no comments. Whereas at the roundtables, it's basically, do you generally agree with what's being proposed or not? And if not, give us some written comments to tell us the basis for why you don't agree or why you do agree. And then we take away and look at it. But the comment letters that are formalized are much more well thought out, more clear on why there's disagreement or partial agreement or even agreement in some cases. So again, but we didn't get any, I would say, across the board on this project, as well as sustainability we'll discuss next, where we got an inconsistency in what we heard from the roundtables and the comment letters. A little more positive in the roundtables because it's either yes or no, and we're most supportive. But in the written comments, we tended to see the things that have come up as the themes for the partial agree or disagree. So I would say there's nothing that was a complete surprise or difference from the roundtables. And that's consistent with what we usually find. I think the difference is you can have the conversation in person at the roundtable. Sometimes it's people don't understand, they have questions, you can talk it through. You lose that benefit with comment letters because it's one-sided. They write down their response to a written document, and then we have to think about how we take that forward. But again, small encouragement if any other staff that were involved and on these projects, Edwin, Karen, if you wanted to share, but sorry, we'll wait on Karen until the next project.
Yeah, I would largely agree with what you have said. I think at the roundtable, we did get the benefit of having a discussion with some of the participants, but then also the comment letters were generally, I would say, more detailed and they had a deeper analysis in their written comments.
Renee, and then Dave.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I had a very similar reaction to Yakuba's reaction when I read the comments. And just to augment what the staff's perspectives are, I agree. I liked the fact that we spend time to explicitly articulate the roundtable comments and perspective. They are more high level, they are more, but I also consider that there was a good strategic conversation around those tables. And I like the combination of the two, the very detailed, thoughtful comments, but also roundtables where their participants at the benefit of more of a conversation. And I think it's going to be useful for us. I think the roundtable comments provide a high level, maybe directional feedback. And the fact that they're consistent is actually very positive. And I think they're going to be useful going forward as we deliberate each of the SMCs. So I really liked seeing them together and how they compare to each other right in the issue papers. So thank you for doing that. It was useful.
Thank you, Renee. Dave, to you.
So, Chair, just to only add a little more color. Interesting about the roundtables that some members have attended. They happen over a long period of time. So we had one roundtable, I think in the Middle East, that might have occurred even before the exposure draft was out, or both the exposure drafts were out. And then we had our last one in Africa that occurred or before the exposure period closed, but the document had been out for a long time. And then the other point I'd make is those that respond in written form have spent time with the document, whereas sometimes those that attend the events, it's sometimes us raising awareness about the document. It actually leads to better responses in written format. So just a different venue, and I'm glad everything's consistent, but they are different formats in which we're getting feedback.
Thanks, Dave. Ross, final comment.
Yeah, just one final comment, and I just wanted to stress for members understanding how important these strategic roundtables are, but also how resource intensive they are. So we were only able to do these roundtables because we had significant support from a number of partners. So specifically the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, FOCAL, countries in the Middle East, and accountancy bodies in the Middle East that have helped us. PAFA in Africa. So, and the benefit of these is when you get that direct conversation with, several hundred people around the world on a regional perspective. But what you're seeing is the result of it as well. When we do our comment analysis, the comments are more informed because a lot of the people who have actually put pen to paper were also roundtable participants. So it gives them that chance, and we get more comments because people get inspired when they come to the event and they see it and they get interested in it, they get educated on it, they want to respond. Now, it's not something we can do for every project. There's a resource issue, and you can only do roundtables so often before people start to just stop showing up. So there is an art to it, but we've been doing this for a few years now, and if you go back and look, every time we've done a roundtable, the quantity and quality of comments is better following roundtable. Now, I'm not a data scientist, and I can't say there's causation there, but I would say there is a relationship to that, and we're benefiting from that. So we'll continue to give this type of analysis when we have a roundtable, but also wanted to say it won't be possible to do it for every single project. It's just a resource issue. Thank you.
Ross, and I think that point about the fact that, if you like, you get individuals attending the roundtables, so we're getting their kind of, raw, unfiltered feedback, whereas actually, as we all know from compiling responses, there's quite a sort of process of synthesis, which tends to moderate and all of those kinds of things. So I think the two forms of response do have a use from that perspective, but actually probably what it does underline is the approach that we've got here, whereby you've got both qualitative points alongside those two forms of quantitative input. So I think it gives that richness, which will really help us moving forward. So with that, Edwin, I think back to you in terms of staff proposals then for moving these various debates and discussions forward from June onwards.
Thanks, Ian. So in terms of cross-cutting themes and issues, I've summarized them on the slide. And based on, and this is pretty consistent with what we've just discussed. So the first one that staff has identified is scope. There was definitely a lot of, I wouldn't say disagreement, but there was a lot of debate in the comment letters on how we should scope this standard, and also on definition as well. And even though the SMCs explicitly just asked about the definition of tangible natural resource and natural resources, we have included in here the description of conservation, because there was a lot of questions asking for more clarity on what is actually conservation. And the third cross-cutting theme was the clarification of the project objectives and how that ties into the IPSASB's conceptual framework. So this kind of ties back to what Angela raised. So some comments did say there were limitations in the guidance that we've proposed, and that's largely because we were trying to fit in guidance that's consistent with the conceptual framework without amending any of the asset definitions or the recognition criteria. So we will have a look at how we can better clarify that in the final standard. In terms of specific issues, so there were some comments on the amendments to the description of heritage assets, and specifically some respondents noted that if an item is a heritage asset, then it's within the scope of IPSAS 45 already, so it wouldn't actually be within the scope of ED 92, so there was no need to amend that description, so staff will be having a closer look at that. There were also a lot of calls for additional implementation guidance and illustrative examples, which staff will look into. And then also there were some comments on the rebuttable presumption on depreciation, the disclosure exemption that was for rare and endangered resources, and also cross-references to IPSAS 45 and the transitional provision. So staff will be looking at those issues as well. So in terms of timing, the plan is to bring back the cross-cutting themes with a fuller analysis in June, and then the remainder of the issues will be analyzed in September. So I'll pause there for comments.
Okay, thanks, Edwin. So comments then on the way staff's proposing to move the issues forward. Yep, Angela.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Edwin. In terms of cross-cutting themes, a theme that came through for me, I've summarised as an expectation gap. I guess you've noted one of them in one of the cross-cutting themes called clarification of project objectives. And you've identified there, I think, which is a clear expectation gap of the project objectives around the hope of a number of submitters, constituents who were hoping that we could advance the subsoil minerals and water reserves. And I think that real concern about government sitting on quite valuable reserves that could be monetised or corrupted or other things. And I think that's true. That's an expectation gap. But I think there are other expectation gaps filtering through a number of the responders. And one of them, I think, the second one is probably a realization by a number of submitters that maybe there won't be much or many natural resources going on the balance sheet, because if you do follow the recognition of an asset, which is entirely appropriate in my view, because of the nature of natural resources, you'll often miss one of those tests, and a lot of people talked about reliable measure, but I think there are a number of submitters realising service potential is quite hard, control, regulatory versus ownership. So there are a number of, I think there was a realisation in here that from a project objective, actually there's not going to be much on the balance sheet. So how is that going to help users in transparency? And then I think there's a third expectation gap, and it may be driven a little bit by realizing not much is going on the balance sheet, perhaps. And that's around broader accountability for your stewardship role. And I would, maybe some people started a while ago thinking this project would deal with service performance around your conservation activity or links to sustainability. And so in terms of project objectives, I think that's right. Your recommendation for a more robust explanation of the project objectives and a positive, I guess I'd like to expand that to talk about those other expectation gaps. It's not just subsoil, but I'd also like us as a board and communication for constituents to be really clear about our project objective. It's always been a bit of a struggle for me what the project objective is that results in supporting entities recognise how to work through the conceptual framework and how to actually think about our specialised natural resources. I think that's a worthy project objective. It's sort of more educational and awareness, but I think we really need to be quite honest about the limited and potential narrow scope, and that there are expectation gaps if you're a submitter hoping for one of those three other things that I mentioned.
Okay. Ross?
Yeah, Angela, I think you're right on a number of points there. I think the one thing just to share that we're planning to do for both this project and climate is a full feedback statement on what we've heard and what the board's decisions were, including on the things we've decided not to make changes for when we get to the point of having the discussion, so that all respondents can see that all aspects of the comments have been appropriately considered, and this is the board's reaction to that. Because you're right on a lot of points there. There are misunderstandings and expectations on this project, and when the board responds to the comments and makes decisions, when you're pleasing some who've asked for some, you're disappointing others. And I think we just, because of the nature of this project and the expectation gap that it's dealing with more than just accounting and financial statements, and a topic that's near and dear to many's heart. So we do plan a full feedback statement. I think the BCs will need to be really well written, and I do think all the issues you've raised will be issues we're going to have debates on at the board as well when we bring back. So those are themes in the comments. Those are things the board's going to have to go back and look at, and staff will provide the analysis for it. I would say the only caution is we need to base what we do and how we take it forward based on what we've heard, compared against the arguments the board made in finalizing the standard. It's not the opportunity to go back to the beginning and rethink it. There is sufficient support across the comments for us to take this forward. The question is how and what decisions the board's going to make on the various issues. This project has been going on since 2019. We've been through a full consultation paper phase. That's been directing our work the whole time through this project. It's not, an ad hoc decision here or an ad hoc decision there. It goes back to the project brief, the consultation on the 2019-2023 work program, where this project was asked to be put on the agenda. The responses to the consultation paper back in late 2021, and how we've taken it forward since in 2022. So there is a long history to this project that's gotten us to where we are today, and we'll need to respond on how we take it forward to finalize the guidance that they've been asking for since 2019 and be clear on why. So that's why we need the feedback statement as well. So I just wanted to come in and ground on that, because I don't think we're going to use the next couple of meetings to go back to first principles and rethink how this project works. And I would say if we are adhering to due process, it's very important that we're moving forward based off what we've heard in the almost 50 comment letters, and how to take forward the exposure draft that we proposed. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Ross. But I think also thanks to Angela for sharpening up in terms of where some of those expectation gaps are coming in. So I think that's very helpful in pointing us to how we need to address this in both feedback and communication. Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the approach that's being set out by staff, but got no issues with that at all. I did have a point, and I guess it's slightly connected, or maybe totally connected, with what Angela was just saying. Not necessarily within the scope of this project, but something to think about is around connectivity. I mean, natural resources is probably one that gets intertwined with sustainability pretty easily. And maybe we need to be clear about those points of connection. And we may experience more of those as we go by. And I don't know if we kind of got a connectivity map, but that may be something that is worth looking at developing to inform future developments, and might also help in setting that kind of the expectation gap that Angela described, which is why I thought it might be a bit related. But I think the connection between the financial reporting and sustainability is something that I think we need to be quite mindful of as we go forward, and this might be the start of that conversation. And the other point I just wanted to raise, which is probably you've heard many times before, but I think it's probably worth reiterating, is around the number of examples and illustrations that we have. I mean, I think there's always a demand for a lot of those. And I think where it's illustrating a concept or a principle, that's very useful, but not to turn it into a kind of checklist for people, and trying to find the balance around that. But start small would be my advice on that. So thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Scott. Right, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, I want to give my shout out to Edwin for a great job summarizing this. But I wanted to just react to Angela's comment, because sometimes not saying a lot answers a lot of questions. And so this has been debated since probably the beginning of time when financial statements are put together, particularly governments on natural resources. And so I think just answering this question moves us forward. And for those that are particularly getting into the first set of statements, I think relieves them of a burden of reporting that they may have thought that they had. So I think while there's not a lot of alternatives, and I totally agree with you, it is a good opportunity to educate our preparers about what goes in, and not worry about certain things that they may have been worried about in the past. And if they don't like that, those future consultations, they can come back and give us some feedback on that. So I think this is a good communication vehicle.
Thanks, Scott. So I think, clear instructions there in terms of thinking about the communication going forward, and Ross's point there on the feedback statement, I think very much links in with that, and making the point about the connectivity, I think, is important as well, given the disclosures in the ED, and also thinking as well about, by the time this gets finalised, we will have had the work programme consultation, which of course is also setting that, in that broader landscape that we've been starting to explore. Okay, so I think a number of useful points there in terms of Edwin to pick up as we move forward. I'm not hearing any disagreement though with the focus for June in terms of, if you like, those broader cross-cutting themes, and then picking up the more specific issues once we've had those discussions in subsequent meetings. So I think with that, that's been a very helpful go round the responses. Thank you again, Edwin, for the work you've done on that. Thank you to members and TAs for the review work that they've done. And so I think that stands us in good stead then in terms of preparations for June, and just to remind ourselves that actually, given where we are at the moment, staff haven't got that many more weeks actually to develop the papers on those issues. So there's a lot to do in a short period of time. Seems to be a theme, doesn't it? Okay, so thank you very much for that discussion on tangible natural resources. So I think what we're going to do is we will have a 10-minute break midway through the meeting, but I think what we're going to do now is we will start off with climate related disclosures. And I'm going to hand over to Karen, I think, to start us off on that.
Thanks, Ian. All right, so we are, sorry, yeah. So we're going to take a look at the overview of responses here first, and then we are going to take the same approach as ED92. So we're going to go through the SMCs just to check whether members are comfortable with the summary of responses. And then Alex will bring us to the thematic categories identified throughout those responses to the SMCs. So the IPSASB SRS ED1 was exposed for public consultation for 120 days, and it officially closed on February 28th. And we went through the most comprehensive outreach that the IPSASB has ever had. We got comments from both roundtables where we took in live feedback from participants and also from our written responses. I know we did show this slide back in March, but now we do have an updated number of responses, which brings us up to 96 responses in total. And as Ross and Edwin said in the previous session, the comments that we got from the roundtables were pretty consistent with the ones in written responses, but there's certainly a lot more color from those written responses that we received. And so moving on, we are going to go through the SMCs and we'll ask board members on whether staff have captured all the significant issues in the summary of responses. So we're going to do this the same as the session just now. So just checking on whether members want to highlight any significant matters that perhaps haven't been picked up by staff. And how we're going to do this is because of the nature of the SMCs, we're going to bunch up SMCs 4 to 6, which ask for public sector specific definitions and also strategies, metrics, and targets for climate-related public policy programs, as well as SMCs 7 to 9, which covers general requirements, conceptual foundations, which include materiality, and also transition. So I'll pass it back to Ian for you to facilitate the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. And just to underline that in grouping those SMCs, it's not the intention is not to stop members raising comments in terms of significant issues that haven't been picked up in discussing those SMCs, but it just actually seemed to make sense to actually group those. We just sort of anticipated that there might be comments crossing both of those. So if you want to put the slide down now, Karen, and we will start to look at SMC1 on the dual role of the public sector and open up for comments on any significant matters that haven't been identified in that paper. Yeah, Mike.
So sorry, that comment maybe belonged to your introduction. Well, when I have read the instruction, even in Ross' paper, given the high number of commentators I have, personally, it's really hard to, let's say, here give a statement whether the all significant issues are raised. That's not possible within those days. So my turn is, just that option to raise an issue later that should not be only a theoretical option. There should be really the chance to bring a point at a later stage because it's really too short to read the entire bulk of things. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Ross, do you want to just comment on that from a due process point of view?
Yeah, so there's nothing that says you can't raise an issue later if it hasn't come up today. And I can tell you from a staff perspective, we've been through this in great detail. I don't think we've missed any major issues. As you get into the nuance of the issues, there might be a spin on the issue or something that we don't fully get today. And this is more about, are you comfortable that we've gone through a process to go through the letters and start to categorize things so we can start to analyze and bring the issues back with a project plan in June and how we're going to take it forward. So we're not looking to fully lock in like, if you're at the roulette table at a casino, it's not all bets are off. You can't raise anything in the future. Like clearly, if you get into the detail and something comes to you as you hear a discussion and comes up in a comment letter, we're going to address this. This is simply like in the last session where Angela did flag a couple of really helpful issues that she thought we should have picked up that we hadn't, that we've missed something that we need to focus on as we take it forward. So that's the purpose of this. And, I do appreciate the volume of letters and how long it takes you to go through. And as I can tell you, the staff, as we've been going through, we've read them a couple of times and, things get a little more nuanced, a little different the third or fourth time you go through, or when you look at a particular letter after another letter. We've also, just to give you comfort on this too, we've played around with putting everything in AI after we were done and doing some checks against our analysis. And if, the AI response analysis flagged something we need to think about, we've even very helpfully had a national standard setter that did the same thing and come back to us and shared their analysis. So, there's a lot happening underneath all of this too to support where we've landed. But to answer your question, Mike, yes, if you get into it and you find something you just think we haven't hit right and you want to raise it down the road, we'll be having consistent discussions. These are the issues. Here's the initial categorization of what we've heard. Here's how we think we need to think about the issues so we can start to move the projects forward. Do you agree? It's that simple.
Okay, thanks, Ross. So Andrew, to you.
Thanks, Ian. It was one comment that came up from our roundtable locally, but it also, if I go to the next paper, 2.2.3, some of the benefits there sort of supported having the two separate standards. And it was really around how the operationalization of two separate standards could work, particularly around the own operations part. In that if it is in a separate standard and because of the alignment with the IFRS S2, it could be easier for people that are familiar with the S2 environment to then be able to understand how this works on our side. But also in terms of resource sharing or sort of capacity building, there is that easier alignment then between people that are familiar or working on an S2 to just go into the own op standard without having a PPP on it. So it was just an additional benefit that I thought was worth considering when we do have the debate around one or two standards. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah. So I think if staff can go back into that will be helpful. Angela.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations again to Karen and Alex and other staff members that did the analysis. I actually think from the work we've done, and I think Mike's right, it is it's a lot to get through. I think they've captured actually the respondents' major issues really well, actually. But something that has been worrying me is what isn't in the responses or what we haven't heard that I had hoped we might hear. And so it's really just logging, well, two main things. There was a lot of good debate around scope, a lot of good analysis around the principle of interoperability with S2 for own operations, and a lot of really good sort of conceptual debate, but also at a much higher level. What we didn't see is much response on the actual disclosures and the appropriateness of actual own operation disclosures given that we're all coming from the private sector. So it's that sort of next level of detailed actual disclosure around governance or risk management. There were some comments around, would this make sense in governments with their different levels of entities and things like that. But so I think that leaves me a little bit worried about silence about the actual disclosures for the public sector, because most people were focusing on the higher order questions. So it's really for noting, and that may have consequences for how we test the actual disclosures, depending on those higher level decisions about structure and separation or not, and interoperability. The second one is I don't think, from my analysis, that we heard from that many users of the information. I think we heard from a lot of interested stakeholders, and there were, I think, the UNPRI effectively represented the investor community, but I think my analysis would say that we didn't hear that much from users. So again, we've analysed everything we've heard, and I think we've categorised it, but there just aren't that many users, which is a bit of a gap in terms of my own sort of desire to know a little bit more about what users want. So I just wanted to flag, not that everything's been captured, I think, very well. It's what we haven't heard or what we haven't unearthed that may give us an issue as we move forward when we get to that next level of actual disclosures.
So I think we have to be quite careful on this, not to anticipate problems that may not exist. We do have a number of forum, for example, we've got the Sustainability Implementation Forum that may well give us quite useful feedback on specific issues. But I think we have to guard against overthinking this, and it probably comes back into overall, what are we trying to do, and the expectations that we've set, that all the way through our constituents have said we need to move forward. And some guidance is better than no guidance because we're still thinking about it. And I think you can see that already with the way that the IPSASB has actually put some clarifications out. You need to give people something to do, to go at, and then you'll get feedback. Ross?
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Angela. Again, maybe I'll just share a couple of thoughts based on your comments, Angela, just on our experience and how due process works. From our perspective, due process is clear. We must go out and consult, and we have to do our analysis as we're doing. We post all the comment letters publicly. So I can tell you we're fully in line with our due process. And, although there could be things we didn't hear, this is the highest response rate we've ever had for a consultation by a pretty wide margin. So I would say I have zero concerns on the sufficiency of what we've heard. We had the roundtables where we, spoke to over 500 people in the regional roundtables. We had other events with investor communities, with other primary users where we heard from them what we hadn't done in the past. So I think we've made a very good effort to get everyone engaged and informed. So I think now we have to do what due process tells us to do, and we analyze the responses we did get and the arguments we did hear against what we proposed, and we take it forward from there. I would say I'm not as concerned about your concern on the specific disclosures that we haven't heard about. From my experience as a standard setter, is if people don't like what you're disclosing, they're not shy to put it in their letter and tell you that. But usually when they're not specific about a concern, it's because they don't have any. So I would say because S2, has been rolled out and there's quite a lot of information out there on it, I do think that, and we're building off of that, and we don't have any major challenges that, again, weren't flagged in the SMCs themselves, then I think people are generally starting to get quite comfortable with that reporting model. So we probably didn't hear a lot of noise. And again, but I can only go on what's in the actual comment letters. And as Ian mentioned, we will have ways to hear from people as we get closer to a standard, and even after with the implementation forum and other forms of outreach. but I just thought it was important that we highlight, what we're required to do in due process and, what the types of things we normally hear about. So if people are concerned, they're usually not shy to raise that as something for us to look at, whether there's a specific SMC on the paragraph or not. Thanks.
Thanks, Ross. Karen?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to echo the work that's been done, the great work that's been done to pull this all together in such a short period of time. It was really, really great. And it is hard to kind of work out because there is so much what isn't there. On the own operations and modelling it on the private sector, though, I'm really, and this is a really difficult one because we don't know what we don't know, but I'm really cognizant that this is still evolving in the private sector, and proportionality is probably the word that is I'm probably most concerned about in terms of applying this in the public sector. And I know that that is an issue for the private sector as well. And like I said, we don't know what we don't know at this point in time, but I think it may be something that we need to keep an eye on in terms of how that evolves alongside our own proposals evolving, because this is not something that has been settled and well established. It's an evolving picture, and I think this may be one where we've got a great evidence base through the responses, but we may also need to keep an eye on what is developing elsewhere to actually inform where we end up in the public sector. And I know that there are different challenges there around accountability and so forth. But I think it's important that we get the balance right and that proportionality is considered as part of this. So it will be good to see how that evolves in the private sector and think about what that might mean for the final proposals that we put forward.
Thanks, Karen. Ross, back on that.
Yeah, thanks, Karen, and a great point. We do have regular discussions with both the I4S Foundation staff and the ISSB staff. So we are monitoring developments on their project, and we will continue to, including some of their minor amendments they're working on. And I will note that proportionality was one of the comments that was received and captured as well. So that is one of the issues we'll have to think about in responding to the responses as well. So good points. And I think depending on how fast the ISSB progresses with any changes to their standard, we'll have to monitor that and make decisions at that time on how we respond in ours. So I don't think we want to end up with a standard that's going in a different direction when they've already decided to move away from something. So what we can't do our standard setting by anticipation. So we kind of do need them to be at a stage where it's settled down and we deal with it. And the last point I would make is we did note right from the beginning of doing this project, because it's so new, because it's so different, we'd have to be more flexible and iterative than we are on a normal financial reporting project. Meaning we might get something out there and we might almost immediately have to start working on some minor changes to that, but people are still waiting for that initial standard so they can get started in their reporting on it. Thanks.
Thanks, Ross. Alex.
Thank you, Chair. First to say, there's a big thank you to everyone for sending your appreciation for this. This was very much a heads down exercise leading up to the April check-in, and it's really appreciation from myself, from Karen, from everyone on the staff of getting to this point and bringing all these papers to you. I wanted to actually just, Angela, on the point that you raised with the investors, come back to that, because just to really kind of give you the broader view that it wasn't just, I think you said PRI from the investor community. There's actually a pretty impressive list that we have from the investor community that came back. So University Pension Plan, Manulife, PRI, GSG, Social Value International. I think Karen might be able to identify a few others there. But that's, I think, very much, as you've said, Ross, at the top of this, down to that really substantive engagement that we brought to the investor community to help us in getting to this stage. So yeah, a really strong response there. You'll also see actually in the not the letters, but the papers, a few references where we talk about the responses back from investors. So you'll see places where we specifically mention what the investor response felt or reflected on in that particular SMC. So just to clarify on that point, Chair.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. Karen?
All right, and just to add to Alex, that we've still been doing outreach with different groups of people. So something that we've done very recently is engaging with Indigenous peoples, and hopefully that will get us more understanding of say user needs of public sector sustainability reporting, and we'll bring that back to the board once we've kind of looked at those issues, and I think it's I agree with Ross and Alex that we've met with we've done the IPSASB's one of the IPSASB's most comprehensive outreach to date, and we've certainly did hear from a lot of different users from different perspectives as well. And on Karen's point, I do agree on proportionality and keeping an eye out on the private sector developments. I think it's a good thing that we've captured that in the summary of responses, that we might need to consider the developments of IFRS S2 as we proceed, and also proportionality is a comment that some respondents raised, and we did bring it up as one of the key issues in SMC 10 as well.
Thanks, Karen. So I think with that, we should move on to SMC2, own operations, and then we'll take a break after that discussion. So if I can open up for comments on the staff analysis on own operations, any additional issues members want to highlight from the responses? Not seeing any flags raised. Probably I shouldn't have said it's time to take a break. That was okay. So what I'm going to suggest is that we take a break now until 25 past, and then we'll come back and we'll move then into scope of public policy programs. So thank you very much, everyone, and see you back in a little under quarter of an hour. Okay, thanks. Okay, so if we can get moving again, then. So refreshed after the break, let us move then to SMC3 on scope of public policy programs, and check whether staff have managed to pick up all the significant issues there. So open for any comments from board members. Yeah, Mike, lead us off.
So thank you, Chair. Not a comment on a missing point. Just a question, as it's very good that defined the terms most, some, and so on. Here, taking the takeaway of that is that the majority of a response are of the opinion that the scope has to be broader. Could you please give a number? Is it, don't know, 75? Or what is it about? Because most of us, maybe 51, that's another intention, as it would be 80%, for example.
Thanks, Mike. Alex, do you want to come back on that? Or
Karen, you're coming in first. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, Mike, I'm happy to give you a number. We've structured this paper in a way that you actually focus on the arguments itself and whether that argument makes sense for the board, and rather to focus really on that quantitative aspect. Sometimes it might be like one response that makes that point, but it makes a lot of sense for the board, and it becomes a significant issue for the board to consider. But certainly happy to have a look and give you a number. We do have a number on that, but where we've said most, it usually refers to more than half of respondents, which in the responses we receive is quite a significant number of respondents.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Karen. I was going to take a similar tact on that. Mike, I think you're probably referencing paragraph 3 here, where it starts with most respondents who expressed a view, proposed or expressed concern around the scope. Is that the one there, Mike?
Yes, it is, but I just compared it to the term primary concern and strong call. And so I was really not able, is it more 50%, is it more 80%? Because there's really a difference between 50 and 100%. So.
Understood. Okay. And yeah, the highest category that we had when we were thinking about those descriptions was most. And in this case, if you go down to the quantitative overview, you'll see 44% disagreed in this case, another 14% partial. So this is already taking us into kind of the most category, but we'll come back to you with a specific statistic on that if you'd like as well. But hopefully that just gives you a sense that it's over that 50% threshold. But I'd argue that it's going to be below 80 as well, if just to give you that range from the discussion today.
Okay, thanks, Alex. That's helpful. Ross?
Yeah, maybe just to emphasize the point I think Karen made, and it's an important one. We haven't, in collating this, spent a lot of time focusing on the amount of support or lack thereof. We've just tried to gather the common arguments into themes. We've given you those numbers for reference so you can think about it. And when we get into the analysis on the issues, we will dig a little deeper as we come up with proposals and ways to take it forward based on what we've heard, based on the framework, based on the thinking the board's already done, and new thinking to take us forward. We will bring in the quantitative aspect, but just to be crystal clear, we never focus on whether it's just a numbers game. It's always a balance between the qualitative input we've received, the quantitative numbers, where the board went in the proposals and why they didn't propose others, and whether the respondents providing information that's helpful in taking it forward. So, it's quite complicated. So I don't want, it's important that we don't fall into a quantitative number driving like a popularity contest on something. Again, it's important. The numbers are context, they're important, but only beside the argument. So That's why even when staff was preparing this paper, we debated whether we even wanted so you'll notice in the natural resource papers, we didn't give quantity, you just basically put the responses. But because of the richness and the breadth of responses here, we did find it was helpful to indicate with most, few, some, kind of given some on that it was helpful, because in some cases there was a really good point that would only be one respondent out of 96. But that's not to discount that it might be a point the board wants to take forward. In others, there might be even half the respondents making a point that doesn't actually, where they disagree or want us to do something else, that you might end up not taking forward because the sufficiency of the arguments provided doesn't change the board's thinking based on what we've done. So we're not at that stage yet, though. We'll be doing that in June and onwards. So just wanted to give you comfort that we will come back to this and all the issues. You'll get an analysis with staff views on how to take them forward based on the responses and based on the analysis of qualitative and quantitative arguments. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I think that's useful discussion. Okay. No other flags raised then on SMC3. Then we were proposing to just group SMCs 4 to 6 in terms of asking for any additional significant issues, definitions, strategy, metrics and targets. Obviously those go together, and interested if there are any additional issues members were seeing in the responses on those SMCs. Yeah, Karen.
Thanks very much, Chair, and apologies if I've overlooked this in the material that's there. I guess the public policy definitions are obviously challenging as part of this in terms of what we want to include, and certainly the types of responses that the governments can make can be quite varied as well, and they might not always exist entirely within the public sector. So there could be policy interventions that rely on working with not-for-profit or the private sector, and so I think it's just making sure that we pick that up as a possibility, and be clear about how we might deal with that situation. Was the first point, and I guess the other one again is I'm probably stating the obvious, but I think in the public policy arena, the governance issues can be different for governments. So when you're talking about a single entity that is doing something, there is generally somebody in charge of that single entity, and the governance and accountability is really clear. In the public policy arena, that might not be a single individual department. It might not stem from what we see in financial reporting as the typical accountability structures. So I wasn't sure that was clear enough, and it may be in there and it's lost on me, but just to recognize that that's something that we need to think about, that we can't necessarily overlay what we're used to from the financial reporting, accountability and governance arrangements, and see that works exactly in the same way from a public policy program perspective. So I just wanted to make those couple of points. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I mean, I think some of that is already covered and has certainly been thought about, and I think therefore we need to see what is said on those before we debate the way forward. But I think useful to have that emphasis again on some of the differences that you see. Andrew, to you next.
Thanks. On these three papers, I did note that they had the largest number of no comment responses on here. And I wondered if we had done any analysis in terms of the type of respondent that did give us no comment. I mean, if it is mainly sort of preparers, then it's quite possibly valid that it just doesn't apply to them and therefore justifiably have said no comment. But I guess if we're receiving this from perhaps users, investors, for example, and they are saying no comment, does that potentially flag to us that what we're proposing here, they wouldn't actually find as useful information and therefore have elected to decide and respond with no comment? So it was just a sort of an ask if we've done any analysis as to the type of respondents that fall in that no comment bucket and if there's any information content in there at all. Thanks.
Andrew, Karen, you wanted to come back on that?
Yeah. So I don't think we've actually done an analysis on which exact function of entities had no comment, but I can tell you that a lot of entities that had no comment to SMCs 4 to 6 often had different views on the SMC 3. So for example, scope of policy programs, sometimes either they think it should be in a separate standard. So maybe SMCs 4 to 6 is not something that they should comment on here, and perhaps that it should be wider. And so there's more that the IPSASB has to discuss and deliberate before moving ahead to SMCs 4 to 6. Another point is on the perspectives of investors. There are certainly mixed perspectives. Some of them do only comment on the alignment with IFRS S2 private sector guidance. There are also comments from certain investors that are saying that the information on public policy programs is useful for them. So I can tell you that there is a mix on responses, even from the 6 investor responses that we received. But happy to look more into what exact types of respondents did not provide comments on this. We did note this in the summary of responses that there are a number of respondents that did not comment on these issues, and we don't want to try to analyze why at this stage, I guess, and but that is potentially one of the reasons, and in addition to SMCs 5 to 6 being more technical questions and questions that are more in-depth and asking more detailed rather than high-level questions.
So I think certainly an instruction there when staff are working through those responses to see whether there's any trends or information that we can glean which actually positively gives us some insights there, because we do always have this problem with no responses as to, does no response mean support? Does no response means said I don't like it in SMC3, therefore I'm not answering those questions, all of those kinds of things, which I think is what you're getting at there, Andrew, isn't it, in terms of can we get some useful aside on that. Yakuba.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to provide a cultural context to those kind of contexts. In my jurisdiction in French countries, if they said no comment, there is no more information, it means that they agree. So maybe we need to take that into account as well. So I don't want to bring burden in the writing, but if we need to analyze those kind of information, cultural context will be a key issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Yakuba. That's probably helpful to staff when they're doing that analysis, just to understand the nature of that conversation and therefore what it does mean. It is tricky, but that's helpful. Okay. So let's move on then to look at the SMC 7 to 9 general requirements, conceptual foundations and transition. Any additional factors there that members saw in the responses that staff need to take into account? Okay, not seeing any flags raised at that point in time. So I think we can then move on to SMC 10 other, which was quite extensive, I think. Any additional issues members saw there that hadn't been brought up by staff already? Yeah, Karen.
Thank you, Chair. So just very quickly, I know that I raised the point about connectivity in relation to the previous agenda, and I see that it's been raised as a point in response to this. I guess there is the counter to that about those that choose to adopt the sustainability standard suite, but don't adopt the financial reporting IPSAS suite. So when thinking about connectivity, we kind of need to keep that as a check and a balance, because I think the intention, as I'd understood it, is that if people just want to adopt the sustainability standards, they can. So if we're thinking about connectivity, we need to not forget that some may just pick up the sustainability standards and not the financial reporting standards.
Thanks, Karen. That was certainly an important discussion that the board had in deliberating whether we should have a separate series of standards or not. Ross?
Yeah, I think interesting point, and I think we should go back to the responses and see what we heard on that specifically as well. But I think your point is a good one, and maybe there's just a disclosure: if you're not applying IPSAS or an accrual framework, how are you capturing the financial effects in a way that provides a true and fair view of your financial related connected information? Because if you were a jurisdiction that was on cash and you didn't want to move to accrual, you were doing good sustainability reporting, maybe we could have a disclosure asking them to explain. But again, that's probably not the time to get into the detail on that. Maybe that's a discussion we'll have when we get to the connectivity issue, but something for us to think about on the staff side. Thanks.
Thanks, Ross. And I think, one of the challenges on that is you don't know, what the circumstances will be. So it's probably in designing a disclosure or anything like that, we just need to leave it reasonably open, because actually, ultimately the board does want people to use both IPSAS and SRS. And so, if others get into difficulties because they're not using IPSAS, well, to be honest, there is an issue in terms of why they're not doing that, and we can't necessarily cater for that. Angela.
Thank you. Just on other comments, I was quite inspired by a submission from the First Nations Financial Management Board on something I hadn't really articulated before, on just transition. I guess information about the trade-offs that in moving to low emission economies, governments or entities are having to think about, particularly Indigenous people, but other groups where they may make choices which don't necessarily lower emissions immediately for one community. And I did think in the public policy space, this really represented the realities of moving to a low emissions economy. So I wasn't sure if it's captured, but it's one of those ones where maybe some other respondents mentioned that as well. But I have to say that inspired me to think about what does that mean for our public policy programs, and I just wondered whether we should note it as another. I thought it was just a very well inspired point.
Thanks, Angela. Dave, do you want to comment based on the session that you had just recently?
You took the words out of my mouth, Ian, and Karen already mentioned this, but Angela, really excellent point, and you'll hear a little more about this in June. As Karen mentioned, last week, Karen and I went down to a conference that was hosted by the UN for Indigenous people, and we had some support from our colleagues at the World Bank to get some Indigenous leaders into a room and really listen to them in a a really intimate capacity. So we have some more feedback coming to the board specific on issues that are top of mind for Indigenous peoples, and we're able to talk to global leaders from around the world. So just wanted to say more is coming, and thank you for raising the point.
Thanks, Dave. I mean, I think that's an excellent initiative, because we've been wrestling for some time about how do we get Indigenous voices into our our work on a kind of representative basis, because we know there are so many different perspectives out there. And actually part of the battle we've had for a while is actually to try and identify a group that would kind of bring those perspectives in, that we could use to test and to get perspectives. So just to say thank you very much to everybody that made that happen. I thought it was a great initiative, really important. Ross, then Karen.
Yeah, I did want to come in on that as well. Just to Dave said Karen and Edwin went down on their projects, but Dave was there too. So Dave, don't exclude yourself from those discussions, because I think they were quite useful. The feedback I got from the team when they came back was quite helpful in an area where we're looking to build engagement, and we've been looking for that international group and a way into that for a while. And I wanted to, again, thank the World Bank, because they were the ones who helped us make this connection to an ongoing meeting that was happening at the UN that happens annually, and opening up this field and an opportunity for ongoing engagement with this group because of the World Bank support, because of these meetings. So on the staff side, we're still thinking about how we take this forward in the future, but we got great input on natural resources and climate related to this issue, and related to comments and themes that were from some of the Indigenous groups that responded to both the consultations. So more to come on this when we get into those issues. But I would say it's already having a good impact, and there's some food for thought on how we can beef up some of the proposed disclosures coming out of that. And I don't want to get into it today because we need time to work it up and look more at the comments themselves. But I think some real good learnings for the staff team as well. I don't want to start to share what some of the staff shared with me, but the community found it was very impactful to have us there talking to them now before the guidance is finalized, so we can think about how to include them in that so that they feel more of a part of it. More to come on this, but again, thanks to the World Bank for their support on this project and helping us make those connections. I can honestly say I don't think anybody's got a good handle on this issue from a standard setting perspective, but I think we've now got a bit of an opening to start building an international community to get these perspectives into our work. Thanks.
Ross, Karen.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. I think that is an excellent observation on just transition, and it certainly echoes a lot of the points that we heard from Indigenous peoples when we engaged with them further last week. And just in response to that point, we did try to cover that in the papers. You can find it in SMC 5, so agenda item 2.2.6. Paragraph 4A. I think I think your view is certainly echoed by a few different respondents as well, on just transition and trade-off decisions, particularly for public policy programs. But certainly, I think that might be an issue that that will be an issue that we have to look into, and hopefully we can it can address your insights as well, and maybe, yeah, I think it's an area for us to look further into.
Thanks, Karen. Good. So any other points then coming out of that general other comments category? Okay, not seeing any hands raised. So, thank you very much again. I think, a very good response from some very broad-ranging, good set of papers from very broad-ranging responses. So, well done in terms of the analysis and the time available. So, Karen, then if you want to move us on then into thinking about, well, what how do we approach this for the June meeting and afterwards?
Great. Yeah, thank you. And so this one's going to be with me actually instead, which is
apologies, Alex.
That's all good. But Karen, thank you for bringing the slide up for this. And for everyone then, this is a representation here on the slide of really the final paper that was included for the April check-in, where we provided an overview of the thematic categories, as we described them, to try and help the board in structuring its thinking now and how we're going to collectively move forward towards further deliberation and eventually a final pronouncement as well. And in doing this, you'll see both in the paper and on the slide that we had these three different areas then. So we had our cross-cutting theme, similar to what Edwin articulated earlier today. And underneath that, then we had our issues of principle and finally implementation issues that were raised through the consultation responses. And for the cross-cutting theme, this is one where for staff, we felt this was a pervasive theme that affects actually how the IPSASB would proceed with developing the standard. It would be really important for the board to then consider, in this case, whether this should be single or separate standards between own operations and public policy programs. And that's, of course, going to have significant implications on the immediate work program of how we progress with SRS ED1. Underneath that cross-cutting theme, there were then issues of principle, so substantive issues of principle that were recurring across the consultation responses that would also require board deliberation for moving towards a final pronouncement. And you'll see some of them sitting outside of own operations and public policy programs. So areas that we've discussed, for example, materiality, the timing of the reporting, if that needs to align with the financial reporting as well, for example, questions around the transition provisions that are provided. And then, of course, within that, we've provided these subsets of both own operations and issues of principle that sit under the own operations requirements, and then issues of principle within public policy programs. And without getting into the details of it now, just at the check-in stage, I think maybe one thing to take away from this is there are a larger variety of issues of principle that the board would need to reflect on in terms of public policy programs. There's a longer list that you'll see listed here on the slide for us. And maybe also just in terms of the structure of this too, there's a number of question marks you see, and those didn't show up in Edwin's slide. These question marks, which also appeared in the paper, these are signifying where we felt the responses required future IPSASB meetings to determine whether these issues actually have merit. So there is actually stepping back of like, well, this is what we've heard from constituents, and that might be different than the exploration of the merit of the particular issue or consideration. And you'll see quite a few different question marks highlighted here through the entire piece. So Karen, if you take us to the next slide, which is just an iteration of this, the proposal from staff in this, in terms of how we'd approach next steps, is that we'd be focusing our attention in the June meeting on the cross-cutting theme. So really bringing our attention directly to this question of whether there'd be single or separate standards and how that would affect the future deliberations of the board in relation to SRS ED1. And alongside that, staff would propose that we bring forward the detailed discussions around own operations. So you'll see that still showing up here in blue, to be able to have that discussion in June, alongside other issues of principle that are not grayed out on the slide here. So there's some that we'd want to bring forward in due course and progress those in due course. But to the extent that we can, Karen and I and other staff are going to be able to put our heads down now and focus on a number of issues of principle that we'd want to bring back for you in June as well. And that's not to discount the importance of public policy programs, the importance of the implementation issues. This is very much thinking about the sequencing for the board of how we will work our way through these 96 responses that we've received from a really broad constituency. So I think, Chair, that's probably sufficient, just giving a sense of this immediate view of what we have in terms of next steps of deliberating the cross-cutting theme, detailed discussions on home operations, and providing that detailed project plan in June as well. So lots to bring back in not too many weeks in that regard. So thank you, Ian.
Okay. So thanks for that intro, Alex. And so really just open up for any comments from the board on that proposed start to those deliberations. So Karen, Alex, if we can stop sharing the slides, and then I'll go to Claudia to start off with.
Thank you. I'm wondering if you should at least analyze the structure of the standard. If you have to distinguish, if you want to have one single or separate standard, maybe we should have also a look into what it means of the structure of the standard. Maybe they are linked together, because if part of the comments you made to the structure of the standards belongs to multiple appendices, complex, and maybe that's are some arguments also for one or two standards. So maybe it's worth to link them or go to the arguments and collect them maybe for the decision making for one or two standards as well.
Thanks, Claudia. Alex, you want to come back on that?
Definitely. Thank you very much, Claudia. I think that's a useful insight probably to take away from the entirety of the slide, which is that for a number of these issues of principle or up to the cross-cutting theme, they can be interrelated. So as we were thinking about this as staff of what we bring you in June, there'll very much be the considerations around the linkages between these issues of principle and how we then look as potential options of moving forward, Claudia. So that's very much on our mind of thinking through the interrelationships between these issues of principle. That's great.
Okay, thanks, Alex. So Patricia, to you next.
Thank you. I think as a cross-cutting question issues, I need to explore the conceptual foundations, considering different strategy, separate standard or one standard. I think you need to think better about the conceptual foundations and how to include in both propositions. And another question, I think it's across cutting theme, is about the connections or the about the common points between own operations and public policy programs. I think it's part of the first group of themes, cross-cutting themes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Patricia. I mean, I think one of the things we're going to have to accept as a board moving forwards is that we're not going to have answers to all of these issues up front. So whilst, for example, the point made on structure might influence you one way or the other, we won't necessarily be able to then bottom it out and say, well, okay, if you go this way, that simplifies the structure in this way. Actually, there's a kind of order in which we're going to have to hit these issues. So I think just to caution members in terms of what you can expect, that we won't necessarily have the complete answer on all of the issues that come, because inevitably these things are all connected. So what the staff are trying to do here is actually just give a way into how do we work our way through these issues. No points will be lost going forwards, but just that there will be things where we go, right, okay, here's the landscape, here are the factors. Now we need a broad directional decision on this. And then these are the things that will need to be worked through in more detail. So I think just to understand that what we're trying to do here is set some direction and then get an order in which we'll actually work through the high level and then more detailed level. Angela.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Alex. Something that sort of has struck me based on our other projects is that we're quite disciplined as a board in the fact that when we make a decision, say in June, we generally say we don't reopen it. I feel this project's a bit different though, given this potentially this interrelated cross-cutting themes and structure. And I think some of the just previous two comments are right. If you did go down a separate standard and removed quite a lot of the public policy, you're left with a smaller document. So maybe structure's not a big issue, but it is if it's together. So without getting into the details. So I guess I'm interested in how is board business kind of perceived in June? Is it I would be wanting maybe to make tentative decisions or tentative at June, because I sort of feel there's not much time between now and June for you to work up arguments and how we make these decisions. Some of us are still catching up with the submissions, and so we're a little bit behind the staff. So how are we thinking about how we make decisions on these big issues? Is there an expectation that everything you bring back in June, we actually have to make a decision for which we cannot reverse? And I'm just conscious that this is such a different project from our other ones where financial reporting, they tend to lead us to be able to make clear decisions and then move to the next stage. I'm not sure in June we're going to be in a great position to have all the answers as board members, even if you present some fabulous pros and cons or framework approaches to how we make these trade-off decisions.
Rules, do you want to come back on that first?
Yeah, so, I appreciate your points, Angela, and the volume, but I think, that's the board's job, is to make decisions. And, people want us to move forward on this. So we're going to provide you with the analysis that gives you the benefit to make the decisions. And, there's not multiple options on every issue. We've got pretty steered, clear, and comments that sit in groups, and we're going to analyze that. And then the board will have to balance off what's in the paper and make a decision. And we do try and keep disciplined that once the board's made a decision that we're not going to reopen it, because it's really hard to move forward if you keep going back and repicking and rethinking every decision. And, there is an expectation in terms of timeliness to market in all of our projects, and we are monitored on that. And our constituents and our oversight council and, the broader environment, they do, consider the effectiveness of the board. And one of the issues is how quick we can do our work. So they do require a little bit of discipline from our perspective. That being said, the board has reopened decisions in the past, and it's not inflexible when it's got it wrong and there's a reason to rethink something. But I would say if again, the staff has been thinking about this, and we've done a lot more than what's in the papers. We just didn't want to start prejudicing decisions by giving you our thinking too early. So we've given you everything now and a really good analysis of what's in those comment letters. And, you might be able to dig and find, a line here or a line there that gives you some different way to think about something. But I would be surprised if after this process today, there's a lot more that hasn't been explored. And in June, on the issues that we bring back, we'll bring you recommendations and we'll bring you a way forward based on our analysis. And it will be up to the board to make decisions at that point, and whether they agree or disagree and provide their basis for why. And the board will have to go around the table and, hopefully get to a place where we've got a consensus view and a decision to take. But even when we have decisions, there's often instructions and, areas where more work is needed. So we've got a pretty rigorous and set open process to do this. And, and we'll have more discussions on the project plan in June, because that's not here today, and how we plan to take it forward, how we plan to reform things like the task force to aid the work to get us there, how we'll use the various groups. So there is a lot more to come, and June will be a pretty important meeting. But that being said, I think it's not a useful approach if we go down everything's tentative, because then you're not making the hard decisions, and the board's not balancing the trade-offs because they feel, well, I'll always have a chance to come back. So maybe I'll just sit back and listen in this meeting and not get my views in. But I do think it's really important that on these projects that all board members come prepared, fully read, fully ready to put their views forward based on what we've heard. That's the job the board has in June. That's the most important thing the board will be doing on these two projects. Everything else on the agenda is important and needs to be addressed, but not to the same level as these two projects. And there is a high external expectation on the board on both the projects we've discussed today. And I don't think it would reflect well on the board if we went out and said, you know what, we're going to give ourselves another 3 years on both projects because there's some tough issues here that you got to ground. I think people are looking for us to go through those issues and start to make decisions and justify why we're making those decisions and taking it forward. So, it won't be perfect. And there'll be lots of debate to be had, but I do think it's the time to reflect and recognize the comments we've heard and that it's up to this board to figure out how to take that forward.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we don't have perfect information, and it's always easy to say, well, what if you've gone a different route, 2020 hindsight? But, ultimately, we have a good set of responses here. We have a good process, and I think, we're going to need to take some decisions, and that decision up front is the key decision that the board will need to take, the fundamental one about how are we going to move forward with the shape of this in terms of, is it one standard or is it two? And that is the key presenting decision that we're going to need to take. And, if we decide to go down the route of two standards, that's fine. How we do that, there's debates and discussions, but fundamentally, we're going to have to take some decisions and we're going to have to move forward, and we're not going to be able to keep circling back. So, but as Ross has said, I think we do really want to make sure that all members have the opportunity to debate and to input to those decisions before we come to them. Staff will present you with the analyses. We've got the responses, and then we are going to have to make a call. So, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to surface that today, to say we need to start thinking about this because we are going to need to take that decision right up front. Angela.
Look, thanks for the clarification. And look, I'm up for the decision. And in fact, last year I was making a lot of separate decisions with an AV. So, look, I'm fairly primed to have this debate. And I guess I was just reflecting on the fact we talked about the way we make sure that everybody on the board is heard, and that we have a genuine debate. And so we talked about things like extra sessions, perhaps, if allowing enough time at the meeting, having a good quality policy paper, if you like, or I call it a policy paper, but a good quality pros and cons. What's the framework? How much is speed to market important? Therefore, that might sway you one way. What did the constituents say? There is a lot of material to drill down to what are the key trade-offs, what are the key factors that will put you one way or the other. And I just recall at March, there were a number of members who made interventions that I came into thinking, this is how I'm going to vote or think about an issue. And someone made a really good intervention, and I was like, that's made me just pause. So it's not so much, I guess it depends on the quality of the paper the staff provide, and I'm so pleased to hear that you're already working on those. How soon we get them, that opportunity maybe to talk to staff ahead of, that 2 weeks before the meeting gets very frantic for a lot of us. It's just business as usual. But if you want to discuss something with the staff, it might take you a week to kind of absorb it, and then it's only a week to the meeting. So I think if we can just make sure that we have those, if we can't nail something in June because it's absolutely it's a huge debate, maybe we need to have a session a couple of weeks later, just a board member only session or something. So it's just using all the flexibility tools that we talked about last year to get us through this project. So I mean, but it's good to be reminded, I think, that we need everybody's input on this, and just making sure that we have the time and the quality of papers to actually really draw out and have a really good debate. Because I think once the board collectively agrees the trade-offs, then we can move forward with confidence. If we're not all clear on the trade-off, or all clear on the overall strategy of what's more critical, that's when things get redebated. So it's kind of saving time down the track by making sure we thoroughly get everybody clear on the strategy and the project objective and how we're going to take it forward. So I guess that's all I was really trying to just highlight.
Thanks, Angela. Ross?
Yeah, thanks, Angela. I think it's really helpful. I think you're you're going right down the line. I think staff's been thinking about it, to be honest. I mean, there were some innovations we tried when we got the ED approved, like the issue owners. We do intend to bring that back again once we get the project plan on the table and a view of what the issues are and the sequencing, that we would have board members helping to lead on various issues and working with staff, in the intervening periods beyond the board, as well as in the board discussions. We're working on the agenda, which will be coming out within the day or so. We wanted to get this meeting done to see where we landed before we finalized the June agenda, but we have extra time in the agenda and flex time. So if the discussions need to go longer, they can. If we need a board session on an issue, that will be available within the first couple of days of the meeting. So we're really being conscious of how difficult and how hard it is to make a decision, but giving the board the tools to make the decisions. So you'll get more on that in the papers, and we will give you, our normal analysis and decision-oriented papers with all the background on the various issues so you can make decisions. Staff is always available for discussions. It's not likely you'll get the papers more than 2 weeks before, and that's simply because it takes a lot of time to get a good set of papers together, and we want to give you the best paper. So it's a balance between the amount of time for members to review and come back to staff before the board meeting, and the amount of time we need to go through our own review and process to get the papers to the right level. And our commitment and our KPI to the board is we get you the papers for a in-person meeting 2 weeks before. For a check-in, it's normally a week because it's less topics, but we actually endeavored to give you more time this meeting. So I think it was about 11 days that we got it out before the Easter weekend for those who observed that. So that you had all the information and additional time to go through it. So we always try for that, but I can't guarantee we're going to give you more because we need to do our work, and we take that very seriously. But I would say we're thinking about it consistent with how you're thinking about it. We're thinking about the need for all 18 members to come in and confirm their views for, against, where their concerns are, and to reflect on what we've heard in the comments and how we're going to get to something. And we don't have in our minds, staff today, a view on what that something is. We're going to go through those issues. We're going to analyze them. We're going to come up with a recommendation, but ultimately it's up to this board to decide how we're going to take things forward.
Thanks, Ross. I think Dave was just going to clarify in terms of the June agenda and the discussions that we're having around that. There is flexibility in there, but there is, certainly at the moment, as a starter, there's a whole day programmed on climate-related disclosures. But there are other pieces of time that we can use. And I think the other thing, reflecting on and just listening to what you were saying there, Angela, I think you gave us the way into how we should actually progress the discussion, because I think reflecting on the very good experience I think we had in March, where we were talking about some of the difficult areas in the presentation of financial statements project, I think the way we set that up is to say, look, let's actually walk around this first and let's make sure we've got all the information, we've got all the points out on the table before then opening up with, well, what does that tell members in terms of the potential way forward? And I think listening to what you said, I think it's going to be really important to have the time for that discussion in June, and to have that right up front before we then, sort of members start saying, okay, well, this is the way forward, I think, on this. This is where my views have got to. Because I think, the strength of the board discussion is exactly as you said, that you come into it with a set of views and then you listen to what other board members have said. And I think it's always really struck me when we have those discussions and board members say, well, actually, I thought this, but I've listened to my colleagues and actually it's changed my view. And that's why we have the board, to have those discussions, and certainly on key issues like the one about how we move this forward strategically, one standard, two. I think that's going to be, just taking that time to have that discussion and allow people to share their views and make sure everybody can share their views. Entirely agree with you on that. I think it's going to be really important. So I think, that's really helpful. And I think that model worked in March, and I think we can use it again, in terms of moving the discussion forward in June. Okay. Any other points at all? I mean, I think, what we're trying to do with this is actually be clear about, so you're not surprised by the way things, we're approaching it, that you've had the opportunity to at least do that landscape survey, and then understand, if you like, the way the staff are sort of thinking about moving it forward. Because we do want everybody to be able to consider this appropriately. Okay, good. So Alex, Karen, anything else from your side?
No,
Nothing
that's
else
all.
from me.
That's
Yeah.
all from our side.
Okay, well, thanks once again on behalf of the board for all the hard work you put into it. I think it's been a really good foundation for today's discussion. I think it'll stand us in really good stead in terms of June. Ross, anything else from your side before we wrap up for today?
Nothing at all, except just thanks to all members, TAs, observers, and everyone for making their time available at all hours of the day and night for this. Really appreciate the feedback today. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but we're looking forward to continuing the discussions in June on these topics, as well as many others. And from that perspective, thanks again from the staff team. And if anybody does have anything they want to reach out to staff offline, feel free. We're here and working hard away. We're happy to have any discussions on any of the issues.
Okay, thanks, Ross. So thank you very much, everyone, for the time today. I think that's been a really good start. We've got some fairly heavy deliberations coming up, but I think at least we've looked at the landscape now, and I think we've surfaced a lot of good issues for us to get into over the coming months. So thank you very much. Thank you to staff, and look forward to seeing everybody in June, in not that many weeks' time. I don't know how many it is, but I'm not going to go there at the moment. So thank you very much, everyone. And we'll give you 3/4 of an hour back now. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.